Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg, the publisher of Orbis Books. I'm very glad to be joined today by Kerra Becker English, who is the author of this new book, True Awakening, The Highs, Lows, and Mess of Spiritual Transformation. She's an ordained Presbyterian minister, spiritual director, a teacher. Awakening is the central word in this book, obviously, and in the title. In fact, the whole book is really about what that means, why it matters, how we can open to that experience, and how it sets us on a path of, as you say, spiritual transformation. And as the subtitle suggests, it's not all rainbows and warm hugs. In fact, the opening words of the first chapter are "Awakening sucks," which
Yeah,
I believe that's a title we discouraged you from using for the book.
it is.
What does awakening mean for you, and why does it suck?
I think it means that something is changing in us, and human beings are notoriously resistant to change. So, awakenings allow us to feel something differently, and our response to that is the transformation part. So we have these opportunities of awe and wonder, and we do have the opportunities of rainbows and warm hugs, but then there's also these times when something really awful happens and we want to use it as a way of getting to something deeper. So that's part of it. And I think, the idea that awakenings suck, I think this book happens to be about individual awakenings, but we're also in the midst of significant cultural change. So as that's happening, we're engaging it whether we want to or not. As things change around us, it's how we respond to those changes. Are we waking up to the plight of others or what's deeply within ourselves? This book tries to cover some of that ground.
Yeah, is awakening entail a mess, or mess is part of life, and still awakening doesn't shield us from that?
That's how I would describe it. That awakening doesn't shield us from the mess. It doesn't protect us or make us somehow immune from the kind of things that life throws at us. But sometimes those opportunities that are messy are ones that will shake us to something else.
I appreciate the fact that you don't show that there's sort of one way of doing this, one size fits all, and that it is for everybody and not necessarily somebody who's starting from sharing your particular religious assumptions or tradition, though you are acknowledging that you're writing from your own experience as a Christian. But it's kind of a field guide to the spiritual journey. Not a matter of believing certain things, but of being access to being alive in a certain kind of way, living a more authentic life. Is that right?
That's my hope. What the spiritual direction program that I went to taught me something really important, that the scandal of spiritual direction is the honoring that each person has their own spiritual journey to walk. So even though we may find ourselves in a particular tradition, each person has a different way they're going to connect with the divine. And I heard a very similar thing from a principal of my daughter's high school. When she first started going there, the principal said, every school is going to tell you that all their students are important. At this school, we want to say that each of our students is important, and it's a slightly different nuance. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to really emphasize in this book is that, um, you know, yeah, finding traditions or connections is important, but everybody's going to do it in their own particular way.
Well, speaking of everybody, who in particular do you have kind of in mind as the reader you would hope would pick up this little field guide?
I suspect that it will initially be spiritual directors who find some interest in it, but my hope is that it flows into clergy and then to anyone who's looking to walk a more spiritual path. And I think especially as younger generations are turning away from the church and trying to find, their own, they've got they've got hangups with the church. I have hangups with the church. I think we're in an era where it's hard in some places to feel like you can authentically call yourself a Christian. So they're looking for ways of exploring the pathways that might feel a little bit more open. And I hope that those who are spiritually curious, whether they're religious yet or not, will eventually this book will find its way into their hands.
Yeah, I have the feeling that it would appeal to a lot of people who are in a kind of exile from their religious roots, turned off by aspects of the practice of other religious people that they've experienced, and you're sort of inviting them to come in and test the waters a bit.
Sure.
And in a very inviting way. I thought that the title, even Awakenings, was shrewd. If you'd called it Conversion or Holiness or something like that, or Abandonment to Divine Providence, that would sound pious. That's not for me. That's for people who are
Sure.
already on this, committed to this path. And then you, by talking about the not sugarcoating it, the highs and the lows and all that kind of stuff, you make it sound like an adventure.
I hope so. I think a couple of times I resorted to, it is kind of like, the gamer's adventure. I watched my spouse and my oldest play video games, and there are these open world concepts, and you kind of choose your pathway. And I think that's part of what's happening in spiritual awakening too, is what are the conversations you're having? What does that lead you to in the next step or the next mission or the next adventure? And I hope that people will see it in a fun kind of way like that.
Well, I really like the way that, on the one hand, you don't suggest that awakening is just a eureka moment.
Right.
It's kind of an ongoing journey, or a first step on a journey, but also that it's awakening is not the goal. It's what it opens you up to, and part of that is a kind of challenge and an invitation to change and grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the awakening is kind of the how to pay attention, how to really wake up and not just be sort of living that reptilian brain kind of life where we get into those modes of, every day is like every other day, but to really pay attention for the spiritual. And then it does transform you. It allows you to live a more spiritual life. And I think Houston Smith talks about that, of there's a difference between that spiritual awakening that's a eureka moment and actually living a spiritual life. And it's starting to fall into those patterns and to really embrace what it means to be a transformed person. So those awakenings keep happening. There might be that one big one or a couple of big ones, and then just the everyday things that make us feel comfortable when our cat sits on our lap, or just something that is warm and endearing can be an awakening to this is what life can be too.
Yeah, I think that it has in common with a lot of books by sort of spiritual seekers that include people like Thoreau or the Desert Fathers and Mothers or whatever, who on the one hand were trying to escape the kind of everydayness that we get lost in, but on the other hand, helping us to awaken to the kind of inner depths of everyday life. You don't have to be in a monastery, or you don't have to be on a mountaintop. It may be like Dorothy, it's in your own backyard,
Right.
but seeing with new eyes.
Yeah, I really felt the call in the middle of the night inspiration that got this book started happened when I was taking a class on Teresa of Avila and her interior castle. So it is modeled in some ways on what does it mean to go deeper along the spiritual journey. But hers had that sense of, sort of these concentric circles of opening, going deeper and deeper into the castle. This one, I think, acknowledges the complexities of our own world in that it doesn't feel very linear and it's pretty messy.
Right. You kind of, at a certain point, you begin referring to mystics and which is not a word you use from the beginning of the book, but it implies that that is sort of a model, or not necessarily to be Teresa of Avila or something, but what is the mystical path imply for you?
I think what I draw on from the mystics is that they have been willing to sit with pain and discomfort, and that it opened up spiritual realms for them. They didn't try to downplay it. They didn't try to numb it away. They believed that there was, goodness and holiness in all things. So even when times were difficult, they looked for where holiness resides. And I think it's beginning to have eyes for that, recognizing, even if you aren't somebody who's comfortable with the word God, to look for holiness and sacredness in our world is to develop the eyes of the mystic.
Well, one of the things you get into as you get into the kind of harder questions is suffering. You spend a lot of time talking about that, not as something that awakened people or mystics go looking for necessarily. Some of them do, but suffering will meet us on the road, and this path that you're kind of introducing or inviting us to join is a way of metabolizing that somehow, or it becomes kind of grist or fuel for our work.
Yeah, I have 2 young adult children who ask me a lot of questions, and and a lot of their questions are, why does the world suck so bad right now? Or how do we live into despair? Or, we live in an age where so many things come at us through our phones and our computers, and that might have, not, we wouldn't have had awareness of that, even 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. So we need tools for being able to stay connected and stay hopeful in times of suffering. And I think part of it is recognizing that, one of the things I say in the book, and I've said in preaching before too, is suffering is a feature, not a flaw. I think we sometimes think, if God were really all that good, the crap in the world wouldn't be happening. But unfortunately, it still does, and it does in every generation. So how we deal with that is a profound spiritual question, and it's one that we'll never have complete answers to, at least not in this lifetime. But I think we as human beings ask those questions. What does it mean to see good people suffering? What does it mean when lives aren't worth much of anything in some circles? Or what does it mean when people who seem to be hell-bent on being out only for themselves have, riches beyond any of us can imagine? So all of those things lead to profound questions, and any religion that can't take those questions seriously probably isn't very deep.
There was a passage that really jumped out at me as the memory was important for you, and that was that encounter you described with Katie Cannon, the African-American womanist theologian, and the question you put to her and how she answered that.
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat some of that? Yeah. I was in a class with her and Paula Parker, who's another womanist scholar, and they're fabulous teachers. And they attract a lot of Black students because that's who they are, that's what they know. But I was one of 2 white students in this class on writing for the resistance, and I realized that I was really, really dumb. There were things that I just didn't know, just couldn't comprehend because of the experiences that I've had. And they were really gracious and wonderful in helping me see things in some different ways. And at one point we were talking about, how people become atheists, basically. And I said, look, there are white people that if they can't find the parking space they want in Walmart, they think God has abandoned them. how in the hell do people who have had the Black experience and all the awful things that have happened to African Americans in this country, um, you know, and then you hear spirituals and joyousness and a sense of, Jesus is known to them and God is known to them. And that's basically what Dr. Cannon said to me. She said, well, it's because we know who God is. And I think sometimes as white Christians, we kind of feel our own privilege and sort of skim along the surface and don't recognize that, we're being told to believe in God, to make this, sort of intellectual assertion that God is real. And we don't take the time to really deepen our prayer and know God personally or know God's connection to us personally.
Or we think of God as somebody who's there to keep bad things from happening to us and let us down if bad things happen, rather than the love that accompanies us even in the midst of the bad things and helps us to see that they don't have the last word, I guess. Now you say that there's no way to avoid suffering, but we can meet that suffering with love. And as you say, that it's not a feature but a flaw. No, it's a feature but not a flaw.
Not a flaw, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's very deep. At one point you imagine a reader saying to you, okay, you tell me that awakening sucks or life is a mess, sure, but then you're going to tell me that it's all worth it, right? And what's your answer to that?
And I'd like to be able to say that it is. I do think that when people begin to experience, their own inner authenticity and feel connected with the divine and begin to feel connected with other people in community, that, yeah, it's worth it being that hard. But I also know that some people have traumatic experiences that I can't make that promise. That's the thing. I can say, I think it will be that way for you. I think for the most part, it's been that way for me. But, we've got a lot of preachers out there who will make promises that they can't make good on because we don't know what somebody else's experience is going to be or what's around the next corner or if you're going to get hit by a bus the next day. We just don't know those things. And I think we're not supposed to completely know those things. And that's the thrill of living, I guess. Is that unpredictability.
Yeah. You say, the more I lean into following the nudges of the Spirit, the more I feel satisfied in my soul, and the more authentically me I become. That sounds like something worth experiencing.
Yeah, and
it may come at a certain price, as you say, because of letting go of certain things, of changing, of being called to be or do things in a different way.
It's realizing that, I think as people age, they begin to realize how they don't have as much control as they thought they did when they were like 25. When you're 25 and you think, if I just do these things, I will have this kind of life. And sometimes it works out that way and sometimes it doesn't. But when you start hitting, 50, 60 and your hip hurts when you get out of bed and things don't happen exactly the way you intend, and you're navigating things with family, whether it's kids or whether it's aging parents, you begin to realize that that life is going to happen whether you're in control of it or not.
Yeah.
And I think the acceptance of that, the acceptance of that fragility before we die helps us prepare for all the little mini deaths, the times when you're going to have to let go and change, or things are going to be different than you expected them to be, to roll with that rather than to get angry. I mean, yeah, I still sometimes get angry about that. I'm still human, but, to be able to finally say, okay, well, that was something that I had no control over. So I can only be, so frustrated at some point, and then I have to say, okay, but I'm still here, and I still have things I need to do. And
The in one chapter you just talk about finding your religion, but then the next chapter is also losing your religion. They could sort of go together, of kind of realizing that you're having to let go, or you're outgrowing a certain kind of religious context that you knew or were brought in, or concepts or understandings of God that don't really fit your experience, or don't invite you to grow. I thought that was very interesting.
yeah, I find myself fascinated by some of the deconstructionist voices that are happening, especially around Christianity right now, who are raising the issues about what's, what all of us really kind of don't like about church when it becomes, too pious or too restrictive, or when it's, sort of behind hatred. I think I read a post from the Center for Action Contemplation this morning that talked about, there are religions that are, people are cosplaying religion to hide bad things. So how do we remove that mask, or remove that, cosplay that's happening, and help religion to move into its next phase of awakening, and to see the possibilities, and be reminded that, when we start looking at things like the golden rule, every religion has some way of saying, be kind to others, and care about your relationship with the divine. It comes back to that, and comes back to that. And we're living in a time when it's good to question.
Yeah, and the questioning and or the doubt is sometimes at the service of seeking a deeper truth, or living more authentically into that truth. Um, in one place, you kind of talk about what are the kind of signs for recognizing religion at its best. I think if I got that right, how would you put that?
I think, religion has to help us be other focused, not just focused on ourselves. Love God, love neighbor, love yourself, love your enemies. And the reason I kind of put true and awakening together for the book is that, a good religion should help you wake up to the realization that I'm a beloved child of God, but you, Robert, are also a beloved child of God, and even some of the people that we don't like all that much, they're beloved children of God too. And and trying to figure that out is, good religion awakens us to that knowledge. Scripture certainly tries to wake us up to that knowledge. And I think paying attention to that matters. The rituals that we do are supposed to connect us around table fellowship, or prayer, or those kinds of things that are community building.
Yeah, you talk a lot about moving toward community, and that this is not just something for ourselves alone, but that it's awakening to something we may be in a community where we're sharing that experience, or challenging each other, holding up a mirror, encouraging each other, accompanying each other in that process.
Yeah, and I'm not the first person to say it, but I've heard it from numerous sources. Awakened people awaken more people. So if you have that sense of light and love and hopefulness about the future, and a reckoning with, God, God is the God that I know, and God is a God of love. That's attractive to other people. That's what creates movements of religion. That's what re-enlivens and brings energy to religion when it gets a little stale and dusty.
Mm-hmm. Well, you write about even the process of how you came upon the feeling, the call to write this book, the experience of writing it, and maybe that was also a stage in your own process of awakening.
It was a big one. I mean, I have taught, I've been writing sermons as a pastor for a long time, but have never really felt compelled to write something more lengthy. And the fact that sort of the outline for the book came to me in the middle of the night, so much so that I was like, all right, I get it. I'm going to get up and put some notes down so I don't forget in the morning. And by the next morning, my family came in and saw that I had an entire wall filled with like Post-it notes of things that I wanted to say or think about or do. And, that doesn't mean that the writing came easy. Then I had to like actually try to put some meat and bones around it. But it certainly was an echo of Teresa of Avila's voice because I was taking that class, but something completely different from what she was doing too. She was writing in the midst of, being part of a cloistered community and all of those things. But, what does it mean to really wake up in today's world? And, I felt like I had a few things I could say about that.
I had an experience like that myself. I had the inspiration to write a book called The Saint's Guide to Happiness, and got a contract to write it. Then I realized I had to figure out what the hell that actually meant. It took me 5 years, and it was a real kind of a journey myself, sort of into opportunity to work through that. And so I really sensed, some of these were things that you have known and practiced or taught for a long time, but I had a sense of experience of kind of discovery as you're kind of thinking your way through this. That's very inviting, very appealing.
Well, thank you. It is, there's a lot of lived experience in this book. And, as I worked a lot with seminary students who did internships with me at one of my churches. And, I said, the blessing for you is you get to learn from my mistakes because I'm going to tell you about them.
Yeah.
So I think
I had the sense that some of those things you described came from personal experience.
Yeah. So some of this is, that it's in the book of, how to, it is field guide, I think is the right way of looking at it because it's sort of my notes from how things have gone in my own life. And, maybe just a little bit of, maybe somebody else can see some of those things in their own.
Well, I really like the way it kind of, draws to an end, a conclusion by showing us that the invitations to awakening or again, not just on a mountaintop or a forest or a monastery or something like that, but are just in our ordinary everyday life. And you don't have to be a different person first before you begin to notice that.
Right.
And you just allow every day in ordinary life and your encounters with other people to speak to you in a new way that you're listening for it.
Yeah, and I think I've listened for it sometimes. I think that there have been times when it's smacked me over the head. So, but yeah, I mean that we've been given this life as a gift. One of the theologians, I can't remember which one, kind of says you have been invited to this party called life by the great divine.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do with it? Or it's Mary Oliver's question, what are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? I hope something, and I hope that this book inspires others to do something, with the life that they've been given. It is a gift. It's a miracle. I mean, we're alive, and as small as that can feel sometimes, it's also quite a treasure to have this sense of consciousness and participation in the world.
Well, your book is certainly a gift, and I hope it reaches many readers, and that it's the beginning of a great adventure, and not an ending, but a field guide that they'll carry with them and report back what they've discovered or share it with the world.
Sure, that would be super fun, right? To hear everybody else's story.
So thank you to Kerra Becker English for writing and sharing with us this beautiful book, True Awakening, the Highs, Lows, and Mess of Spiritual Transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.